Well, this is not just any Friday. This is the Friday before Hallows Eve, Halloween. I think we're up for a little bit of a scarification, if you know what I mean. We're going to be looking at The Wrong Turning, Encounters with Ghosts, introduced and edited by Stephen Johnson. Now, this is part of one of my all-time favorite collections, the Notting Hill editions. We've actually delved into these editions on various topics, and will continue so to do. But this one is perfect for us today. And it starts with a poem by Emily Dickinson. One need not be a chamber to be haunted. One need not be a house. The brain has corridors surpassing material place. Far safer of a midnight meeting, external ghost, than its interior confronting that cooler host. The body borrows a revolver. He bolts the door, o'erlooking a superior spectre, or more. What was Emily Dickinson expecting? From the introduction, Stephen Johnson says, "A menacing enchantment?" That memorable phrase occurs in The Sculptor's Daughter, the childhood memoir of Tove Jansson, creator of the Moomins. It captures a sense of both magic and encroaching darkness that was so much part of the infant and adult Jansson's imaginative world. And yet, there was one thing that made little Tove feel safe amid the blackness of the long Finnish winter nights. Stories. Particularly the stories told to her by her mother, the illustrator, later the model for Jansson's wise, practical, endlessly loving Moomin Mama. And Moomin Mama states, "The log fire is alight, and we draw up the big chair. We turn out the lights in the studio and sit in front of the fire." And she says, "Once there was a little girl who was terribly pretty, and her mummy liked her so awfully much." A soft, gentle voice in the warm darkness, and one gazes into the fire and, oh, nothing is dangerous. Everything else is outside and can't get in. Not now, or at any time. But not everyone is blessed with a mummy like Jansson. For those who aren't, there may be another possibility, that the story itself can perform a similar function, giving form to the threatening shadows, and in the process of taming them, containing them. When the story is well told, maybe the very pleasure we take in the telling can help us deal with those fears, make them less menacing and more enchanting. My first memory of being gripped, scared, but also enthralled by a ghost story goes back to when I was about 5. I was with my mother in the kitchen, and David Davis, head of BBC's Children's Hour, was beginning a story on the radio. Oh, I'd heard that beautifully modulated, deliciously reassuring voice before. reading Winnie the Pooh and The Wind in the Willows, and I made myself comfortable in preparation for a similar listen to Mother session. What I got, however, was M.R. James' terrifying The Haunted Doll's House, in which two children are somehow made away with by the hideous, frog-faced apparition of the rich grandfather their coldly avaricious parents have obviously murdered. I remember spending a fearful, truly haunted night, and yet I was also hooked. Was this pure emotional masochism on my part? Or was there a sense that I needed to face something down, to peer into the darkness that so frightened me? Could it even be that I'd begun to realize what Thomas Hardy had grasped, that if a way to the better there be, it exacts a full look at the worst. And with those encouraging words, I'm going to read to you from Lanning. Title: Men Take Refuge from Ghosts in a Bathhouse. Hunchback Bridge in Hangzhou is commonly said to be haunted by evil spirits which molest passers-by. East of the bridge stands a bathhouse with hot water during the night. One day, a man walking alone was caught in the rain. Suddenly he found someone else sharing his umbrella, and he suspected this was a ghost. Since they were on the bridge, he pushed the other into the water and took to his heels. Catching sight of a light in the bathhouse, he went in to escape from the ghost. Soon, a man came in, drenched, who panted, a ghost with an umbrella just pushed me into the river so that I was nearly drowned. When they talked together, each discovered his mistake. Another man was out walking one night with no lantern when it was drizzling. Hearing footsteps behind him, he turned and saw a huge head on a body only about 2 feet tall. He stood still to watch, and the big head stood still too. He walked on, and so did the head. He broke into a run, and the head ran too. In fear and trembling, he bolted to the bathhouse, pushed open the door, and dashed in. But before he could close the door, the head followed him in, nearly frightening the fellow out of his wits. When he picked up a candle for a better look, it was only a child with a big peck measure on his head to keep off the rain. Because the child was afraid of ghosts too, he had followed closely at his heels. So this man was also mistaken. Had these 4 people all gone different ways without clearing the matter up, they would have been convinced that they had seen ghosts. So why should men today think they might see ghosts and be afraid of them? So much of life is perception. Now, from Emily Bronte, from Wuthering Heights, from 1847. The following evening was very wet indeed. It had poured down all till day dawn, and as I took my morning walk round the house, I observed the master's window swinging open, and the rain driving straight in. Oh, he cannot be in bed, I thought. Those showers would drench him through. He must either be up or out. But I'll make no more ado. I'll go boldly and look. Having succeeded in obtaining entrance with another key, I ran to unclose the panels, for the chamber was vacant. Quickly pushing them aside, I peeped in. Mr. Heathcliff was there, laid on his back. His eyes met mine, so keen and fierce. I started, and then he seemed to smile. I could not think him dead, but his face and throat were washed with rain. Bedclothes dripped, and he was perfectly still. The lattice, flapping to and fro, had grazed one hand that rested on the sill. No blood trickled from the broken skin, and when I put my fingers to it, I could doubt no more. He was dead and stark. I hasped the window. I combed his black, long hair from his forehead. I tried to close his eyes, extinguish, if possible, that frightful, life-like gaze of exultation before anyone else beheld it. They would not shut. They seemed to sneer at my attempts, and his parted lips and sharp white teeth sneered too. Taken with another fit of cowardice, I cried out for Joseph. Joseph shuffled up, made a noise, but resolutely refused to meddle with him. "The devil's harried off his soul," he cried, "and he may have his carcass into the bargain for aught I care. Nick, what a wicked un he looks, grinning at death." And the old sinner grinned in mockery. I thought he intended to cut a caper around the bed, but suddenly composing himself, he fell on his knees, raised his hands, and returned thanks that the lawful master and the ancient stock were restored to their rights. I felt stunned by the awful event, and my memory unavoidably recurred to former times with a sort of oppressive sadness. But poor Hareton, the most wrong, was the only one who really suffered much. He sat by the corpse all night, weeping in bitter earnest. He pressed its hand and kissed the sarcastic, savage face that everyone else shrank from contemplating, and bemoaned him with that strong grief which springs naturally from a generous heart, though it be tough as tempered steel. Kenneth was perplexed to pronounce of what disorder the master died. I concealed the fact of his having swallowed nothing for 4 days, fearing it might lead to trouble. And then I am persuaded he did not abstain on purpose. It was the consequence of his strange illness, not the cause. We buried him, to the scandal of the whole neighborhood, as he wished. Earnshaw and I, the sexton, and 6 men to carry the coffin, comprehended the whole attendance. The 6 men departed when they had let it down into the grave. We stayed to see it covered. Hareton, with a streaming face, dug green sods and laid them over the brown mould himself. At present, it is as smooth and verdant as its companion mounds, and I hope its tenant sleeps as soundly. But the country folks, if you ask them, would swear on the Bible that he walks. There are those who speak to having met him near the church, and on the moor, and even within this house. Idle tales, you'll say, and so say I. Yet that old man by the kitchen fire affirms he has seen 2 on 'em looking out of his chamber window on every rainy night since his death. And an odd thing happened to me about a month ago. I was going to the Grange one evening, a dark evening, threatening thunder, and just as the turn of the heights, I encountered a little boy with a sheep and 2 lambs before him. Oh, he was crying terribly, and I suppose the lambs were skittish and would not be guided. Well, now what's the matter, little man? I asked. There's Heathcliff and a woman yonder, under the nab, he blubbered, and I durstn't pass him. I saw nothing, but neither the sheep nor he would go on till I so bid him take the road lower down. He probably raised the phantoms from thinking as he traversed the moors alone, on the nonsense he had heard his parents and companions repeat. Yet still, I don't like being out in the dark now, and I don't like being left by myself in this grim house. I cannot help it. I shall be glad when they leave it and shift to the Grange. They are going to the Grange, then, I said. Oh, yes, answered Mrs. Dean, as soon as they are married, and that will be on New Year's Day. And who will live here, then? Why, Joseph will take care of the house, and perhaps a lad to keep him company. They will live in the kitchen, and the rest will be shut up, for the use of such ghosts as choose to inhabit it, I observed. No, Mr. Lockwood, said Nelly, shaking her head. I believe the dead are at peace, but it is not right to speak of them with levity. At that moment, the garden gate swung to. The ramblers were returning. They are afraid of nothing, I grumbled, watching their approach through the window. Together they would brave Satan and all his legions. As they stepped onto the door-stones and halted to take a last look at the moon, or, more correctly, at each other by their light, I felt irresistibly impelled to escape them again, and pressing a remembrance into the hand of Mrs. Dean, and disregarding her expostulations at my rudeness, I vanished through the kitchen as they opened the house door, and so should have confirmed Joseph in his opinion of his fellow servants' gay indiscretions, had he not fortunately recognized me for a respectable character by the sweet ring of a sovereign at his feet. My walk home was lengthened by a diversion in the direction of the kirk, when beneath its walls I perceived decay had made progress. Even in 7 months, many a window showed black gaps deprived of glass, and slates jutted off here and there beyond the right line of the roof to be gradually worked off in the coming autumn storms. I sought and soon discovered the 3 headstones on the slope next the moor, the middle one grey, half buried in the heath, Edgar Linton's only, harmonized by the turf and moss creeping up its foot. Heathcliff's still bare. I lingered round them under the benign sky, watched the moths fluttering among the heath and harebells, listened to the soft wind breathing through the grass, and wondered how anyone could ever imagine unique, unquiet slumbers for the sleepers in that quiet earth. And finally, something else, something different. Flann O'Brien, Crookskean Lawn column, from the Irish Times for December 1944. Many years ago, a Dublin friend asked me to spend an evening with him. Assuming that the man was interested in philosophy and knew that immutable truth can sometimes be acquired through the kinesis of disputation, I consented. How wrong I was may be judged by the fact that my friend arrived at the rendezvous in a taxi and whisked me away to a licensed premises in the vicinity of Lucan. Here I was induced to consume large measure of intoxicating whiskey. My friend would not hear of another drink in the same place, drawing my attention by nudges to a very sinister-looking character who was drinking stout in the shadows some distance from us. He was a tall, cadaverous person, dressed wholly in black with a face of deathly grey. We left, drove many miles to the village of Stepaside, where a further drink was ordered. Scarcely to the lip had it been applied when both of us noticed, with what feelings I dare not describe, the same tall creature in black, residing in a distant shadow and apparently drinking the same glass of stout. We finished our drinks quickly and left at once, taking in this case the Enniskerry road and entering a hostelry in the purlieus of that village. Here more drinks were ordered, but it hardly appeared on the counter when, to the horror of myself and friend, the sinister stranger was discerned some distance away, still patiently dealing with his stout. We swallowed our drinks raw and hurried out. My friend, now thoroughly scared and could not be dissuaded from making for the faraway hamlet of Selbridge. His idea was that, while another drink was absolutely essential. It was equally essential to put as many miles as possible between ourselves and the sinister presence we had just left. Need I say what happened? We noticed with relief that the public house we entered in Selbridge was deserted. But as our eyes became more accustomed to the poor light, we saw him again. He was standing in the gloom, a more terrible apparition than ever before, ever more menacing with each meeting. My friend had purchased a bottle of whiskey and was now dealing with the stuff in large gulps. I saw at once that a crisis had been reached and that, desperate action was called for. No matter where we go, I said, this being will be there unless we can now assert a superior will and confound evil machinations that are on foot. I do not know whence comes this apparition, but certainly of this world it is not. It is my intention to challenge him. My friend gazed at me in horror, made some gesture of remonstrance, but apparently could not speak. My own mind was made up. It was me or this diabolical adversary. There could be no evading the clash of wills. Only one of us could survive. I finished my drink with an assurance that I was far from feeling, and marched straight up to the presence. A nearer sight of him almost stopped the action of my heart. Here undoubtedly was no man, but some spectral emanation from the tomb. The undead come on some task of inhuman vengeance. I do not like the look of you, I said, somewhat lamely. I don't think so much of you either, the thing replied. The voice was cracked, low, and terrible. I demand to know, I said sternly, why you persist in following myself and my friend everywhere we go. I cannot go home until you first go home, the thing replied. There was an ominous undertone in this that almost paralyzed me. Why not? I managed to say. Because I am the taxi driver. Out of such strange incidents is woven the pattern of what I am pleased to call my life. And lest you think that's all that there is, I just want to tell you a little bit about the contents of this particular volume, which you can find at Story and Song. W. Jacobs, The Monkey's Paw. Oh my goodness, that's scary. Oh, and here's one that just sent chills up and down my spine. A little too long to read. Penelope Lively's Black Dog. And things like Alexander Pushkin from The Queen of Spades, and Henry James from The Turn of the Screw. Oh, terror awaits you. And just a word of caution. when someone knocks at your door. Be careful.